He was just a dog, or so they thought, until he stood between life and 100-foot drop, staring down death to save a creature no one else dared to help. A bear cub, trembling and alone, clinging to the crumbling face of a Colorado cliff. One wrong move, and it would all be over. But Ranger didn't move. He waited. He chose to stay. Not because he was ordered, but because something in him still believed. In second chances, in life, in miracles. What happened next will shake your soul, and maybe restore it. Before we begin, tell me, do you have a dog who's ever surprised you? Share their name in the comments. I want to know who's listening with you today. And if you believe every life, no matter how wild or wounded, is worth saving, hit that subscribe button. Because this story might just change what you believe about loyalty, courage, and grace. The morning air in Pine Ridge, Colorado, carried a sharp edge. It was the kind of cold that didn't just sting. It settled into the bones, quiet and unrelenting. Frost still clung to the tall grass in silver threads as the early sun brushed the tops of the evergreens with gold. Far below the main trail, a ravine curved into the side of the mountain like a long-healed scar. And somewhere within that scar, a sound broke the silence. A low growl, followed by a single bark that echoed like a question thrown at the sky. Daniel Holt paused his stride. Mid-30s, broad-shouldered, unshaven jaw peppered with a few days' stubble, Daniel wore a dark green parka with the emblem of the U.S. Forest Service barely visible beneath the snow dust. His gray beanie sat pulled low over messy brown hair, and his steel-blue eyes scanned the slope instinctively. His breath came in short puffs, visible against the crisp morning air. At his side was Ranger. Ranger was a 7-year-old German shepherd, thickly built with a sable coat flecked with silver. One ear had a small nick, a scar from a training accident years ago, and the fur on his right shoulder still showed the ghost of an old surgical shave. Ranger was calm, deliberate, but alert in every muscle. Once a member of a mountain rescue K-9 unit, he'd been semi-retired after an avalanche mission went tragically wrong. Now he was Daniel's only consistent companion. The second bark came sharper, followed by a distressed whining. Ranger lowered his head and moved forward at a quick, cautious pace. Daniel followed, sliding slightly as they left the worn path and headed toward the edge of the ridge. The trees opened into a clearing of rock and sparse shrubs, and that's when they saw it. A bear cub. Small, perhaps less than a year old, covered in matted brown fur and visibly shaking. It was hanging halfway off the ledge, its front paws clawing at a patch of loose dirt and pine needles, its hindquarters dangling helplessly over empty air. The cub let out a muffled cry, a sound more fear than rage. One wrong shift of its weight and it would fall. Daniel's body stiffened. He took a slow step forward, scanning the surroundings. No sign of the mother bear yet, but she wouldn't be far. Bears never left their young willingly. Ranger stopped 3 feet from the edge, standing completely still. His ears perked, eyes locked on the cub. Then he looked back at Daniel, waiting for instruction. There was no panic in him, no hesitation, just readiness. Daniel pulled out his radio, lifting it to his mouth. "This is Holt. I've got a live cub hanging off a cliff just east of Pine Ridge Loop. Potential danger. Requesting immediate wildlife rescue support. Coordinates incoming." The static response crackled back with confirmation. Daniel stepped closer and knelt beside Ranger. "Easy, boy," he whispered, more out of habit than necessity. Ranger didn't move. His eyes were focused, but soft, as if even he knew not to startle the cub. Daniel scanned again, then heard a faint rustle in the underbrush behind them. Not large, not threatening, A woman appeared between two trees, camera slung over her shoulder, her breath ragged from climbing. She was tall, perhaps 5'10", dressed in a gray hiking jacket and faded jeans tucked into worn boots. A navy blue knit cap framed her auburn hair, which curled slightly at the edges. Her eyes, a quiet green, flicked from the dog to the ledge, then widened. "That's a bear cub," she said, breathless. Daniel stood, his posture defensive but calm. "You shouldn't be here. This area's restricted. I was filming wildlife near the ridge. I heard barking." She paused. "Is it going to fall?" Daniel didn't answer. His mind was on timing, on angles, on possibilities. The woman took a small step forward, careful not to make noise. "I'm Lucy Monroe. I'm freelance, Denver-based. I do features on endangered species." She held up her press badge briefly before slipping it back into her coat. "I'll stay back. I won't get in the way." Daniel nodded curtly but kept his eyes on the cub. "If that mother bear comes back, you run. No questions." Lucy didn't argue. Instead, she pulled out her camera, switched it to silent mode, and began filming from behind a snow-flecked bush. Her hands shook slightly, but her focus was precise. Meanwhile, the bear cub let out another plaintive sound. It tried to pull itself upward, only to dislodge more dirt. Daniel swore under his breath. He didn't have climbing rope, and the rescue team was at least 15 minutes out. Too long. "Ranger," Daniel said quietly. The dog responded immediately, crawling forward inch by inch, his weight low, his gaze steady. He inched toward the cub, close enough that Daniel could see Ranger's breath misting near its fur. The cub froze, eyes wide, its body trembling. Ranger stopped, sat, and tilted his head. He emitted a soft, almost questioning whimper, a sound Daniel had only ever heard him make around injured fawns. The cub didn't move, but it didn't panic either, and that was something. Daniel eased forward to join Ranger, one hand bracing on the snow-dusted ground. He reached into his coat for a protein bar, unwrapped it slowly, and crumbled it into his palm. He extended his arm toward the cub, letting the scent drift over. "Come on, little one," he whispered. "Hold on." From behind the brush, Lucy lowered her camera slightly, watching the entire moment with a held breath. It wasn't the angle she expected. It wasn't just a rescue, it was reverence. A man and a dog speaking a language older than tools or guns, something wild, something sacred. Far in the distance, the low thrum of a helicopter began to echo across the ridge. And at the edge of the world, a cub fought not to let go. The sound of the helicopter grew louder, thudding rhythmically through the thin Colorado air, but it still hadn't broken through the tree line. Daniel stood a few paces back from the edge now, keeping one eye on the cub and one on Ranger, who remained frozen in a crouch, calm, yet coiled like a guardian statue. His tail rested low against the snow, but his ears stayed perked, waiting for Daniel's voice. Lucy, from her position tucked behind a downed log, adjusted her camera, but kept her eyes on the man instead of the lens. There was something in the way Daniel watched the scene, not just focus, but an ache, a weight beneath the surface. He wasn't just trying to save the cub. He was trying to make something right. The wind shifted, brushing Daniel's coat and ruffling the fur on Ranger's back. The cub whimpered softly, its claws slipping slightly in the icy dust. Daniel didn't move to help. He couldn't. Not yet. But inside his mind, memories pressed against the present like echoes against stone. 6 years ago. The avalanche had come without warning. It was late February. The search and rescue team had been dispatched after a family went missing in the timberline trails. Daniel's wife, Emma, Dr. Emma Holt, was the team's field vet. Tall, quick-witted with dark red hair always half tucked under her hood, Emma was as fearless as she was empathetic. She was the one who had insisted they bring Ranger that day. He had only just graduated from avalanche training, the youngest in the unit. The mountain turned on them without mercy. White thunder tore through the ridge. Screams vanished under snow. When Daniel dug his way out, it took 3 hours to find Ranger buried half frozen but alive. It took a full day to accept that Emma wouldn't be. He remembered the taste of blood in his mouth from biting his own tongue. Remembered holding Ranger against his chest in the emergency tent, whispering promises he didn't believe. Now here they were again, snow underfoot, time slipping like the ledge beneath a bear cub's paws. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then turned to Lucy. "Any sign of that chopper?" She stood up, brushing snow from her jeans. "I think it's circling, waiting for a clearing in the trees." She took a hesitant step closer. "Daniel, right?" He nodded, distracted. I just wanted to say I knew your wife. Not well, but I interviewed her once, years ago. She was working on a rescue program for rehabilitating orphaned wildlife. She talked about ethics, about the soul of care. It stayed with me." Daniel looked at her properly for the first time. Her face was wind-chapped, her eyes honest. There was no pity in her voice, only memory. "You're Lucy Monroe," he said slowly. "She had your article taped on the fridge." Lucy's mouth parted slightly, the cold stealing her words for a moment. "Then she told me something before we wrapped the interview. Said, 'The wild doesn't need us to save it. It just needs us to listen when it's calling for help.'" Daniel almost smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. She said that a lot. I never really understood it. Until now. Ranger let out a soft huff and shifted slightly. Daniel turned his attention back to the cliff. "We have to move when they arrive," he muttered. "Fast. That cub won't last long." Lucy glanced back through the trees. "You're going to climb down yourself. I'll do what I have to." From the brush line behind them, another figure emerged, tall in his early 30s, wearing the beige and olive uniform of the county sheriff's department. He had close-cropped dark blonde hair and a trimmed beard, and though his build was strong, his gait was careful, even thoughtful. Deputy Mark Keller. He introduced himself, stepping into the clearing. "Got your call. The heli team's hovering, looking for a place to set down. Weather's turning." Daniel nodded. "We've got a cub hanging by its claws." Any rope gear, Mark unslung a heavy-duty backpack and dropped it beside them. 2 coils, climbing harness, no winch. He knelt and opened the pack, revealing coiled rope carabiners and gloves. Ranger backed up 2 steps to stand beside Daniel, his tongue flicking briefly over his nose. Mark glanced at the dog with admiration. "Is this him, Ranger?" Daniel nodded. "He's done this before." Mark smiled faintly. "Heard stories about him when I was a rookie. Didn't think I'd see the legend in person." Lucy, sensing something unfolding beneath the surface, stepped aside to let the 2 men work. She trained her camera on the cub again, watching its paws twitch. Mark caught Daniel's eye. "I also heard about what happened in Timberline." "I'm sorry." Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he took the rope and began fastening it around his waist. "No apologies necessary. I didn't come out here looking for redemption." Mark handed him a glove. "Maybe. But sometimes it finds you anyway." The wind howled again, louder this time. The sky was turning pale, soft clouds curling over the peaks. Ranger barked once, short alert. The cub's claws scraped stone. It wasn't going to hold much longer. Daniel clipped the rope to his belt and looked to Ranger. "Stay." Ranger obeyed instantly, dropping into a half-sit, eyes locked on the cub. Mark took the other end of the rope, bracing it against a thick tree root, while Daniel inched toward the edge. Breath-steady muscles coiled. Lucy held her breath. And then, just before Daniel began his descent, she said quietly, "Your wife would be proud." Daniel didn't turn, but for a moment his shoulders lifted as if breathing for the first time in years. The wind picked up harsh and quick, funneling through the pines and cutting through every open seam in Daniel's coat. He crouched at the cliff's edge, boots digging into the icy dirt, one gloved hand braced against a jagged rock. The rope around his waist tugged slightly as he tested the tension. Deputy Mark stood firm at the anchor point behind both hands, gripping the line, eyes locked on Daniel's every move. Below them, the bear cub let out a soft, frightened whimper, its claws barely holding on to a ledge no wider than a shoebox. And beside that ledge, Ranger moved. The German shepherd crept closer, with the patience of a ghost, each step deliberate. His belly nearly touched the ground, tail low, but steady eyes fixed not on the cub, but on something beyond. A shift in the air, a scent in the wind. Daniel noticed it too, just a second too late. A deep, guttural growl rolled over the cliff like thunder. At the ridge above them, opposite side of the outcropping, stood the mother bear. Massive, nearly 6 feet at the shoulder, her fur a thick matted brown streaked with pine needles and melting snow. Her breath steamed in bursts as she roared again, lower this time, a sound torn between desperation and warning. Her eyes, dark and wide, darted from her cub to the dog. She took one step forward. Lucy, standing just beyond the tree line with her camera raised, froze. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the focus. Through her lens, she could see everything, the bear's nostrils flaring the tension in Ranger's shoulders, the cub straining for balance, and Daniel hunched low, hand stretched out, rope taut. A moment balanced on a blade. Ranger Daniel whispered, "Stay with me." The dog stopped where he was, just a few feet from the cub. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. Instead, he sat calmly, defiantly, his back facing the mother bear body, angled protectively between her and the ledge. His posture wasn't aggressive. It was something deeper, a gesture of trust. The bear hesitated. Her breath came faster. Her front paw lifted, hovered, then slowly returned to the earth. She grunted but didn't advance. Daniel exhaled slowly, not daring to move. He knew this moment. Predators didn't bluff, but they calculated. She was assessing the threat, the risk, the value. And somehow in Ranger's stillness, she saw no threat. Only a strange, loyal guardian. Mark called from behind in a hushed tone. "You want me to distract her?" "No," Daniel replied without looking back. "She's not attacking. Not yet." Lucy lowered her camera for a second, heart pounding. She had covered wildlife for years. She had seen wolves tear apart elk, had crouched behind blinds, watching mountain lions devour their kill. But she had never seen this, a domestic dog no more than 70 pounds, holding the attention of a wild bear without force. Just presence. The wind howled again, and the trees groaned above. Snow flurried sideways like ash. The cub slipped a little lower. It yelped sharply, and the mother bear snarled, her muscles tensing again, but still she didn't move forward. Ranger turned his head slowly, just enough to glance at the cub, then back toward her ears, twitching. He seemed to understand the stakes. Daniel inched a bit closer, keeping his profile low. "Easy now," he said softly, more to himself than to the bear. "Just hold. Just a little longer." Then, with an almost reverent motion, Ranger lay down. Fully, belly to ground, ears back. A submissive position, but not fearful. He kept himself between the cub and the bear, but lowered every sign of dominance. It was a gesture Daniel had seen before, but never in the field, only in training when teaching young dogs to gain trust from wounded animals. It was vulnerability offered as peace, and it worked. The bear let out a long, rumbling breath, not quite a sigh, not quite a growl. She backed up one step, then another. She didn't leave, but she no longer advanced. Daniel moved now, hand slowly reaching toward the cub. His fingers brushed against its fur, matted and damp. It twitched, frightened, but didn't pull away. Inch by inch he reached further, cradled under its chest, then its belly. The cub weighed more than he expected, maybe 60 pounds of wiry muscle and panic. He turned his head. "Mark, get ready." The deputy responded, tightening the rope around the anchor point. Daniel secured his grip. 3, 2, lift. The rope strained and the cub rose with it. Daniel pushed with his knees back, arched muscles burning as he guided the cub up onto the flat ledge. The second it landed, it scrambled forward straight to Ranger and collapsed beside him, panting eyes wide, but no longer panicked. Lucy, watching through tears she didn't remember letting fall, captured the moment just as the mother bear gave a low, mournful sound. She didn't move closer, but she didn't leave either. She watched. And she waited. The wind howled down the ridge like a voice torn from the earth, flinging flurries of snow through the air in violent spirals. The sudden storm had come fast, as mountain storms often did, unannounced and unrelenting. The once clear view of Pine Ridge's jagged outcrop vanished behind a wall of white turning rock into ghostly silhouettes and trees into shadows. It felt as if the mountain itself had exhaled a breath of frost, and now everyone left exposed was caught in it. Daniel hunched low beside Ranger and the bear cub, his jacket pulled tight, eyes squinting against the snow that lashed his face. The cub whimpered, pressing its body closer to Ranger, who lay curled beside it like a living barrier. The German shepherd's ears twitched but didn't flatten, and though his breath fogged and steamed, he stayed completely still. His warmth pressed to the cub, his presence steady as stone. Lucy stumbled forward from behind a fallen pine branch, her auburn hair soaked and clinging to her cheeks, her lips turning pale from the cold. She had been filming minutes ago. Now she was shivering, clutching her camera to her chest as the wind ripped through her coat. She stopped in her tracks when she saw Ranger and the cub huddled together beneath the exposed ledge. Without speaking, she slid her backpack off and dropped to her knees. From beneath her coat, she unzipped the outer shell navy blue lined with thermal fleece and draped it carefully over the cub, tucking it around its neck and shoulders. Her fingers moved with surprising gentleness despite their trembling. Daniel looked up briefly from where he crouched near the fire pit he'd dug into the frozen soil. "You didn't have to do that," he muttered. Lucy met his gaze. "Neither did you," she said simply. Then she reached into her bag for a thermal blanket, eyes darting to the sky. Nearby, Mark Keller was anchoring what little shelter they could build. The deputy's face was red from windburn, his beard dusted with ice. He had taken off his own jacket to use as part of a makeshift windbreak, a crude lean-to made of his coat. Daniel's backpack and several wide pine branches wedged into the snow. Not much, but enough to cut the worst of the wind. Mark glanced over at Lucy. "You okay?" She gave a nod, though her lips were blue. "Been through worse. Got lost in Yellowstone once during a summer hailstorm. Took 3 hours to find a ranger station. This isn't so different, just more fur." Mark almost smiled, but his eyes were sharp with concern. He turned toward Daniel. "Radio's dying. We've got maybe one call left before it freezes solid. You want me to try?" Daniel looked at Ranger, at the cub, at the swirling snow all around. He nodded once. Mark stepped behind the shelter and pulled out the emergency handset from his belt. He huddled low to the ground, shielding the device with both hands as he spoke into the mouthpiece. His voice was low, urgent. "This is Deputy Mark Keller, requesting emergency landing from Mobile Rescue Unit. Weather conditions have deteriorated visibility near zero. We've got a cub on the ground, canine deployed, human exposure rising. Request light frame medevac chopper with precision landing ability." "No time for protocol." He paused, his voice tightening. "I'll take the report hit. But we lose someone if you wait for green light. Static." Then a clipped voice responded. "Stand by. We'll reroute a unit. 10 minutes out. Get them ready." Mark lowered the handset and exhaled through his nose. He muttered mostly to himself, "I'm not letting another life slip through for the sake of paperwork." Meanwhile, Daniel had knelt again beside Ranger, carefully checking the cub beneath the layers of jackets and fur. It blinked slowly, its breathing shallow but steady. Ranger's fur was already dusted white from falling snow, his eyes half-lidded but alert. Daniel reached out, brushing snow from his back. "You're still with me, huh?" Ranger let out a soft breath in response. Not quite a whine, more a reassurance. Lucy had wrapped herself in the emergency blanket and sat huddled near the fire, which was now crackling weakly thanks to dry twigs and flammable resin Daniel had kept in his survival kit. The flames offered no more than a few feet of warmth, but it was enough to keep frostbite at bay. She watched the fire flicker, eyes distant, then glanced at Daniel. "Was your wife a vet?" she asked softly. Daniel didn't answer right away. Then, "Yeah, she'd be proud. This whole scene, it's more than just a rescue." Daniel's jaw clenched slightly. It's a second chance. The snow fell thicker. Above them, the trees groaned under the weight. Somewhere behind the veil of white, the faint thump, thump, thump of rotor blades began to echo, muted but rising. Mark stood. "That's them." Daniel looked up, eyes narrowing. "We need a clearing." Mark scanned the area. 50 yards east, slight slope but less rock. "I'll guide them." He turned and vanished into the snow. Daniel looked at Lucy. "Stay with Ranger. Keep the cub calm." She nodded. "Be careful." He jogged after Mark. Left alone with the animals, Lucy crawled beside Ranger, pressing her shoulder gently to his side. "You really are something, you know that," she whispered. "A shepherd in every sense." The bear cub blinked again, then nestled deeper into Ranger's side. And above them, through the curtain of white hope spun in wide circles, slowly descending. The snow had begun to slow, but it hadn't stopped. Thin silver threads drifted across the mountainside like ash from a dying fire. The ridge remained cloaked in white, with only brief glimpses of rock and bark showing through the frost. Ranger and the cub still lay nestled together beneath the makeshift shelter, their bodies curled inward, radiating mutual warmth. The cub's eyes had shut in exhaustion, its breathing soft and shallow, while Ranger remained half awake, his ears flicking at every new sound. Daniel stood a few feet away, knees bent, one gloved hand on his hip as he scanned the ridge above. Something felt wrong. It wasn't the snow now. It was the silence. Then it came. A crack. Not loud, but distinct. The sound of snow giving way beneath weight that had shifted, compacted, and finally lost all hold. Daniel's head snapped toward the edge. Just beyond the shelter, a section of overhanging ice fractured with a jagged line like a lightning bolt across the surface. He ran. "Mark!" he shouted over his shoulder. The ledge, Mark Keller, who had just returned from guiding the medevac chopper with orange signal flags, dropped the gear and sprinted toward the shelter. His boots punched through layers of brittle snow. Lucy, crouched by the fire with her blanket still half wrapped around her, turned sharply toward the sound. Ranger had already moved. In a single motion, the German shepherd rose and stepped directly between the cracking ledge and the cub, his paws dug into the powder. He growled not at a threat, but at the cliff itself, as if defying the mountain to finish what it started. Daniel reached them just as the snow beneath Ranger's back leg gave way. His front paws stayed firm, but his rear legs slipped slightly as the surface crumbled. Daniel dropped to his knees, grabbing Ranger's harness. His glove wrapped around the nylon strap with every ounce of grip he had. "Hold!" he hissed through clenched teeth. "Don't move, boy. I've got you." The bear cub whimpered, eyes opening in confusion as snow swirled around its face. Lucy was beside them now, throwing herself to the ground beside the shelter, reaching to hold the cub steady with both arms. She didn't think she simply reacted. Mark arrived moments later, grabbing the back of Daniel's coat to anchor him, while also planting his boot against a knot of tree roots to stop the slide. The cracked edge didn't collapse completely, but a portion of it slid off like the lip of a melting candle spilling down the cliff in sheets. Snow and ice tumbled into the valley below, crashing onto rocks unseen. The mountain had flinched, but not fully fallen. When it stopped, all was still. Daniel didn't let go of Ranger's harness. Not yet. Ranger, for his part, stayed silent. His body was trembling not from fear but strain. When the moment passed, he looked back at Daniel with that same unreadable gaze, part instinct, part trust. "You didn't let go," Daniel whispered. "You stubborn, ridiculous, beautiful dog." Mark released Daniel's coat and helped him stand. "We need to move now. That ledge isn't going to hold another hit." Daniel nodded, helping Ranger take a step back onto firmer ground. Lucy crawled backward with the cub still under her coat. Her eyes wide, her face flushed with adrenaline. Her voice was shaky when she spoke. He moved to shield it. He put himself there. Daniel didn't answer. His throat had closed up. From above, the sound of rotor blades finally reached them again, louder now, more direct. A bright yellow helicopter crested the ridge, its skids angled toward the clearing Mark had flagged. It was smaller than the previous chopper light compact and built for quick maneuvers. A red cross was painted along its flank. The pilot, a woman with a buzz cut under a black rescue helmet, lowered the craft smoothly toward the snow. She had sharp cheekbones and a steady grip on the throttle, her eyes hidden behind black goggles. When the skids touched down, she gave a crisp nod through the window and signaled 2 in max weight. Mark helped guide the bear cub into a thick nylon transport sling with Lucy's assistance. The cub, still half-dazed, offered no resistance. Ranger sat off to the side, watching, chest heaving, but head high. Snow clung to his fur like it belonged there. Once the cub was secure and loaded, Daniel turned to the pilot who had stepped out of the cockpit. Her name tag read Wren. She was short, maybe 5'2", with wiry limbs and a no-nonsense energy that clung to her movements like static. "You got room for one more?" Daniel asked, gesturing to Ranger. Wren looked at the dog, then at the weight chart on her wrist pad. She clicked her tongue. "If he's quiet and doesn't bite." "He doesn't bite unless you're paperwork." She cracked the faintest smile and nodded. "Strap him in. We're wheels up in 2 minutes." Lucy stepped closer to Ranger as Daniel lifted him gently into the rear of the chopper. She reached up and touched his muzzle lightly. "You saved that cub," she whispered. Then she clicked the voice recorder on her phone, held it to her lips, and said softly, "Ranger, you got this. Always did." Daniel climbed in after Ranger, giving one last look at Mark and Lucy. The deputy gave a thumbs up. Lucy just stood there, hand raised against the snowfall, her eyes glassy. The rotors roared, the chopper lifted, and the storm at last began to clear. The helicopter shuddered against the wind as it rose above the treetops, rotors slicing through gusts that pushed hard against the frame. Inside, the narrow cabin space was tight, loud, and cold. Ranger lay curled around the bear cub, the two of them cradled together on a folded trauma blanket just behind the cockpit. The cub's eyes were barely open now, its breaths short but steady. Ranger hadn't moved from its side once. Captain Wren Hughes sat at the controls, her fingers wrapped around the cyclic with the kind of quiet precision that came from years in medevac rescue. She was a small woman, wiry and lean in her early 40s, with sun-dried skin and short salt and pepper hair tucked beneath her black helmet. Wren didn't talk much, especially not during flight, but she had glanced back more than once. Each time she saw the same thing, Ranger shifting his body slightly to shield the cub whenever turbulence rocked the cabin. When the chopper lurched to the right, the bear cub squealed softly. Ranger immediately nudged closer, placing one paw across its side and lowering his head until his snout rested against the cub's neck. The motion was precise, protective, almost human. Wren watched through the rearview mirror mounted above the dashboard. "He's not just a dog, is he?" she murmured. Daniel, sitting across from them in the rear bench seat, said nothing. His hand rested lightly on Ranger's back. His eyes were fixed on the two creatures before him, two lives somehow bonded by snow danger and instinct. He leaned forward slightly to brush a few flakes off Ranger's fur that had somehow followed them into the cabin. The dog didn't flinch. He only flicked an ear, acknowledging his partner's presence. Back on the ground, Lucy stood with her phone raised beneath the thinning snowfall. The helicopter was only a speck now, a dot of yellow caught between clouds and sky. She and Mark had synced into the live telemetry system from the rescue unit's body cams, one mounted in the rear cabin of the chopper, and she'd made a decision she hadn't told anyone about. She'd gone live. Not just to her followers, but publicly. She didn't have time to edit to script to build a narrative. All she had was a shaky signal, a screen, and a moment. And that moment was enough. The feed began with static, then resolved into the flickering image of the cabin Ranger curled protectively around the bear cub. The image wasn't staged, it wasn't even stable, but it was raw, powerful, and pure. Within minutes, the view count surged. "I've never seen a dog do that before. Is this real? Please keep them safe." A little girl from Texas commented under her mother's account. "Please save the bear. He looks like he's sleeping with his big brother." Then she typed again, "Save him like you save part of my heart." Lucy swallowed back a lump in her throat. She never looked away from the screen. Her voice shook as she whispered into the stillness, "You're doing great, Ranger. You've got this." Beside her, Mark Keller stood with arms folded, watching quietly. His square jaw was set, his brow furrowed. He was a practical man, had served in search and rescue for 8 years, and rarely got emotional. But as the video continued, even he couldn't help muttering, "That dog's more soldier than half the men I've worked with." Inside the helicopter, Wren received confirmation of landing zone clearance. "Prep for descent." She called back, voice clipped through the headset. Daniel leaned down and spoke into Ranger's ear. "Almost there. Just a little longer." The bear cub stirred. Its paws shifted and its head tilted slightly upward, nudging under Ranger's chin. The gesture was soft, grateful. Wren guided the chopper down through a narrow pass carved between pine trees, her hands steady, even as downdrafts pulled at the skids. A small clearing opened below, marked with signal flags and flares set earlier by another Ranger team. The ground crew stood ready, 2 wildlife medics in thick brown parkas and 1 logistics officer waving signals. As the skids kissed down onto snow-packed earth, Wren powered down the engine slowly, letting the rotors coast to a stop. She turned her head to Daniel. "We're home." Daniel unlatched the door and swung it open. Cold air surged in sharp and biting, but it no longer felt hostile. It felt like something being released. He helped lift the cub, first gently placing it into a thermal sling provided by the medics. The cub made a soft sound, not fear, not pain, but something like a sigh. Then came Ranger. The shepherd didn't wait for command. He stepped out on his own ears upright despite the exhaustion dragging on every limb. One of the medics, a young man named Kyle with shaggy blonde hair and nervous hands, reached out automatically. Is he trained for this?" Daniel gave a tired smile. "He's trained for everything." Kyle blinked, then nodded, taking the sling and guiding it toward the field hospital tent nearby. Lucy's live feed ended just as the landing completed. She looked down at her phone. Over 72,000 views, thousands of comments. But what struck her most was the silence. How many people had simply stayed watching without typing, as if they were holding their breath. Mark looked over. "You good?" She nodded. "Yeah. I think that story told itself." He smiled faintly. "Best ones usually do." Far above the clouds were beginning to part, and in the snowy clearing below, a cub and a dog, two creatures never meant to meet, had somehow made it through the storm. The snow had stopped by the time the sun rose over the foothills. A faint orange glow pushed through the haze above the Pine Ridge Rescue Center, painting soft light on the canvas of frost-covered trees and the long white tent where the field medics worked through the early hours. The storm was behind them now, but not forgotten. Inside the main triage tent, the bear cub lay on a thermal mat, its breathing shallow but rhythmic. A small bandage was wrapped gently around its front paw where frostbite had set in, and an IV line ran into its flank supplying warmed fluids. Ranger sat just inches away, unmoving except for the rise and fall of his chest. His head rested across his front paws, and his amber eyes never strayed from the cub. Despite the tense bustle voices movement, the low whir of portable heaters, Ranger remained still, watchful, as if the cub were still hanging from that cliff, and his presence alone kept it from slipping. Across the room, Dr. Mila Reyes, the attending wildlife veterinarian, monitored vitals from a small digital screen. Mila was in her mid-50s with shoulder-length gray hair, tied in a low bun, and deep-set brown eyes, framed by laugh lines and long hours. She wore a blue fleece under her white lab coat and thin gold glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Her hands were steady, her voice low and warm, a tone that calmed both animals and humans alike. She glanced toward Ranger and whispered to her assistant, "He's not going anywhere, is he?" Her assistant, a young intern named Caleb, barely 20, lanky red-haired and constantly scribbling notes, shook his head in awe. "Hasn't blinked in 10 minutes. Mila smiled. "Then we'll work around him." Outside the tent, Lucy stood with a camera pressed to her chest, not filming this time. Just holding, processing. She had barely slept. Her phone buzzed with hundreds of notifications, comments, shares, messages from people all over the country reacting to the live stream. But right now, none of that mattered. Mark Keller emerged from the admin cabin nearby, walking briskly toward her. His uniform jacket was zipped to the neck and his hair was still damp from washing up in the restroom trailer. He stopped beside her, hands in his pockets. "They're stable," Lucy said softly. Mark nodded. "I just got off the radio with state headquarters. They want a full report on what happened, timeline, video, decision chains." He hesitated. "But I want to pitch something more." Lucy looked at him. "What do you mean?" Mark glanced toward the tent where the silhouette of Ranger could be seen beside the cub. That dog did what 10 trained responders couldn't. Not just the rescue, but the calm, the trust, the connection. He paused. "I want to propose we form a wildlife response K9 unit. Call it Ranger Unit. Build it around that idea, dog-human teams trained to respond to emergencies in the wild." Lucy blinked, then smiled. "You'll get my full support." Mark half shrugged. "Might get me laughed out of the regional office." Or applauded. Meanwhile, inside the tent, something shifted. Ranger lifted his head, not abruptly, but with intention. His ears perked slightly, and he stared through the canvas wall as if he'd heard something beyond it. A low, rumbling growl sounded in the trees outside. Not hostile. Familiar. Dr. Mila paused mid-note and tilted her head. "That's not thunder." From the tree line, a shadow moved between the branches. Massive, slow, brown fur like moving earth. The mother bear stepped into the clearing. She was larger than any black bear they'd tagged in the region, easily 300 pounds, with a thick coat now matted by storm and dirt. Her gait was cautious but not uncertain. She sniffed the air once and then began walking directly toward the tent. An alert was called. 2 rangers scrambled toward the perimeter with tranquilizer rifles, but Mila raised a hand from the doorway of the tent. "Wait," she said. "Just watch." The bear stopped, just feet from the tent's open flap. Ranger rose silently and stepped forward. Not aggressively, just present. The mother bear looked past everyone, past the humans, the gear the scent of medicine, and locked eyes with the dog. Her breath fogged in the morning light. Then she stepped forward again, nose lowered. The cub whimpered. In that instant, everything held still. Then the bear moved gently into the tent just enough for her wide head to reach the mat where her cub lay. She leaned down and pressed her nose to its fur. Lucy raised her camera but didn't lift it. Instead, she pulled out her phone and quietly recorded a single unedited clip. The bear licked the cub's forehead once, then turned her head toward Ranger. There was no sound. Just that gaze in animal's language, wordless and ancient. A pause, a nod, and then she backed out, returning to the trees. Lucy exhaled shakily. Did anyone else see that Mark nodded slowly? Every second. Later that day, Lucy uploaded the clip. It spread even faster than the first. Within hours, it had reached international feeds captioned in dozens of languages shared across conservation networks, schools, animal shelters. In the evening, after the last light fell behind the ridge, Daniel returned from a debriefing session to find Ranger asleep at the cub's side. He lowered himself beside the dog, resting one hand on his back. "You did it, boy," he said quietly. And she knew. The tent was quiet, peaceful. But something had changed. Not just the story, the system. 1 month later, winter's grip had loosened. The snow along Pine Ridge had receded to patches beneath tree shadows and northern slopes, and the wind that once howled across cliffs now moved with gentler breath, rustling early pine cones and setting loose the scent of thawing earth. The mountains were quieter now, but not still. Something had changed, not just in the land, but in the people who walked it. At the ranger station's wooden notice board, a laminated newspaper clipping flapped faintly in the wind. The headline read, "The Dog Who Held the Cliff," by Lucy Monroe. The article had spread like wildfire through national conservation circles, animal rescue networks, even parenting forums. It wasn't just a report, it was a testimony. A story about the power of connection across species. About instinct, trust, and the silent strength that comes from standing still when the world wants you to run. Inside the station, Daniel sat at the old oak desk in the operations room, his jacket slung over the chair, sleeves rolled up as he sorted through a week's worth of letters. His hair had grown longer curls, pushing from under a pine-green ball cap. He looked healthier, more rested. A man slowly stepping back into the world. Across the table sat Toby Garrison, a retired firefighter from Durango. Late 50s with crow's feet and forearms like railroad steel, Toby had volunteered to help consult on logistics for the proposed wildlife canine training initiative. He was blunt, methodical, and completely at ease around animals. He pushed a folder toward Daniel. "That's 5 different counties expressing interest in satellite branches for your ranger unit, and 2 universities asking if they can incorporate it into their environmental science programs." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know we were an institution yet." "You're not," Toby said with a dry grin, "but you will be." Just then the front door opened with a cheerful chime. Lucy stepped in, cheeks flushed from the cold scarf draped loosely around her neck, a stack of envelopes clutched in one arm. "They just keep coming," she said. "We've had to start sorting by state." Daniel chuckled. "Any more from Texas?" Lucy nodded, setting the mail on the table. 3 today. One's from a school, the other from someone who says you saved their brother in the Timberline avalanche. Daniel paused. "You sure?" She pulled out a navy blue envelope slightly bent at the corners. "You want to read it?" He didn't take it right away. His gaze lingered on it for a long moment before he whispered, "Later." Down the hall, Ranger padded into view. Fur now clean and brushed. A faint scar healed over his shoulder. He walked with the calm dignity of an old soul who had seen storms and chosen to remain standing. He stopped beside Daniel Tail, sweeping lightly against the floor. Daniel reached down, fingers slipping into the ruff of his fur. "Your fan club's getting bigger than mine." Ranger blinked slowly and leaned into his hand. Meanwhile, across the state in a softly lit recording studio nestled between redwood cabinets, Catherine Delaney, host of the long-running NPR segment Voices of the Quiet, sat at a microphone. She was in her 60s, short silver hair curled tight, her voice the kind that warmed rooms even over airwaves. She smiled at the small stack of letters before her. Tonight, she began, "We have something special. A letter from a listener in Boulder. Well, two, actually. A little boy named Jonah and his mother Elise." A pause. Then a child's voice echoed faintly, channeled through a recorded interpreter. "Dear Ranger, I can't talk with words like other kids, but I talk with my hands. I saw you on Mommy's phone. You didn't bark. You didn't move. But you still helped. Mommy says that's called courage. Thank you for teaching me that even quiet things can be strong. Love, Jonah." Catherine wiped a tear from her eye, then returned to the mic. "There are many kinds of heroes," she said softly. "Some bark, some don't. But the truest ones know when to be still, and how to hold on." Back in Pine Ridge, Lucy stood before a whiteboard in the community center. Daniel, Mark, and a handful of volunteers were gathered as she outlined plans for an educational initiative, one combining wilderness safety, animal empathy, and canine training for at-risk youth. Her voice was steady animated. Her eyes lit up as she sketched out weekly workshops, guest speakers, wilderness hikes with Ranger as the mascot. When someone asked if she planned to stay in Pine Ridge permanently, she paused just long enough to smile and say, "I already did." Later that evening, the three of them, Daniel, Lucy, and Mark, sat outside the cabin Ranger now shared with Daniel. The stars above were bright as silver spray across deep blue. No wind tonight, no storm. Just the rhythm of breathing, the crackle of a small fire, and Ranger curled at their feet, eyes half closed but still watching. They didn't speak for a while. There was no need. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they arrive on 4 silent paws in the shape of a dog who simply refuses to let go. Ranger didn't speak, but through his stillness, God spoke volumes about loyalty, about compassion, and about how even the quietest soul can change the fate of another. In a world that often forgets to listen, maybe what we need is less noise and more faith. Maybe the answer to our prayers doesn't always come in the way we expect, but it always comes. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment and tell us. Have you ever witnessed a quiet miracle? And if you believe like we do, that animals are one of God's gentlest messengers, then comment Amen below. May God bless you and keep you safe wherever you are. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where hope finds its way through the wilderness.